Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining our webinar this morning. With the Windows 7 deadline on the horizon, we are keen to assist you in the steps you need to take to achieve a simple, secure and cost-effective modern workplace. Today we have Heinrich Pelser from PowerON Platforms and Fabian Porquet from Bytes to talk you through how Windows 10 can do this and empower both your workforce and your business. A quick bit of housekeeping. During the webinar, you are muted, but you can submit questions at any time via the questions box on the right hand side of the screen. There is a Q&A session at the end to answer all of these submitted questions. The webinar recording will also be made available after the webinar. Please also complete the critique form at the end where you can request a callback from one of our specialists at Bytes. I will now hand you over to Heinrich from PowerON.
Thank you very much, Andy. Let me just share these. There we go. Just to confirm, Andy, you can see my slides that I'm sharing, right?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So good morning, everyone. My name is Heinrich Pelser. I'm one of the business consultants here at PowerON Platforms. And the sort of purpose of today's webinar is to obviously run through some of those modern management bits and pieces around the Windows 10 stack and everything else that obviously accompanies that journey. So my background, I've got about 11 years in the IT industry. My sort of professional background stems from very much the Microsoft EUC space. There's some bits and pieces there as well. If you want to get in touch with me, my email address is there at the top. Obviously, all of this information will be shared with you guys as we progress. And onto some mandatory sort of PowerPoint slides here to keep the guys at marketing very happy. So at PowerON Platforms, we're a gold certified partner. We're also part of the EM+S Elite Partnership Group. Gives us some nice inroads into the product team there. And then as a solutions provider, we've kind of split the business into two elements, mainly around sort of the solutions and services that we provide. On the left, you'll see product solutions. So we've spent some time developing a cloud-based management solution, leveraging things like configuration manager and so forth. It's also called Pulse. There's some operational monitoring side of things, some cloud-based monitoring. We've also got Camino automated deployments of system center products, as well as then some specialist packages which we provide within the Windows 10 space as well. As part of the consultancy side of things, we focus heavily on the modern workplace, hence kind of today's webinar. We've also done a lot of work around cloud platforms and integration, as well as in your standard ITSM side of things. And we've also expanded that to obviously include things like smart teaming. More than anything. Smart teaming elements include, for example, sort of managed service as such, with obviously sort of extended inroads into your IT team to help support them throughout this sort of Windows 10 journey more than anything. And speaking of journeys, I suppose one of the biggest things to consider as we go from modern management further on down the road, we need to understand kind of what traditional management is, just to kind of set the scene more than anything, and obviously then explain the path down the road as we kind of trying to get towards this modern management landscape, right? So sort of traditional and typical tools used as part of this would be things like your Active Directory, which is quite standard. You know, guys would be leveraging things like group policy, configuration manager. You then, as an IT team, look to sort of split your security attack vectors, as they say, and you kind of have third-party integrations from a security perspective. So the idea there is, if I'm protected by a third-party antivirus and something happens on the Microsoft side of things, a third party should stop that, and so forth, and vice versa. And normally as IT departments, we would look to sort of primarily focus on the desktop side of things from an EUC perspective. You may have had BES and sort of earlier integrations around mobile device management, but from a Microsoft solution, traditionally in this sort of last sort of 10, 15 years, it wasn't something they massively adopted until obviously the emergence of something like Intune, for example. And 9 times out of 10, you know, we would have things on premise, maybe in virtualized environments or sort of physical traditional environments as well. But all of that encompassing technologies would make up the sort of traditional management arms of our sort of EUC landscape a lot of the time. Right. So the sort of typical process, that IT departments are used to is, you kind of go through the process of sort of acquiring Windows, which can sometimes be complex in its own right, especially with the 7 and 8 sort of transitions that we used to see. We would then kind of do the sort of deployment motions and project planning aspects around kind of, being able to deploy the operating system. We would typically leverage things like Configuration Manager, MDT, Ghost, Landesk, all of those other solutions are obviously available as well. And then that would then flow into, for example, our identity side of things, how users are managed, how group policies things are managed, the security settings and everything would then also follow into that as well, into the app space, okay? And this is typically where IT used to spend a lot of time, containing things, making sure things work in an on-premise environment, which in itself could be quite time intensive as well. We would then, for example, have Configuration Manager, typically, or WSUS, deliver updates, the management and ongoing side of things, but typically on average, and this is a statistic from Microsoft, that 56% of IT time spent was around the sort of update and managing things like security, applications, Windows updates, and so on throughout a sort of typical deployment motion. So it's very, very sort of time intensive. Obviously, depending on your requirements, a lot of these things were sort of mandated by existing technology in terms of applications you would have to provide to end users, sort of compliance from a regulatory perspective around where data goes and doesn't go as well. But the whole sort of process, would be circumvented into this quite time intensive side of things for IT. The following slide I stole from a colleague of mine who was kind of going through the process of adopting more of a modern management piece, and he used the following sort of text you see in front of you as a bit of a strap line. As a joke, I kept it, saying that this quote was from Tony Stark, who is a fictional character, as you all may know. He never updated his slide, presented this, and he kept it as such, so sort of homage to him. I thought this would be a kind of very good slide to sort of put up as the kind of the way he sees this modern management world. So in a nutshell, effectively, in a mobile first, cloud first world, management should be effectively empowering your end users to be productive from anywhere. That in itself is a very difficult sort of concept at times for IT to actually put into practice, especially from an on-premise environment, just because of the sort of overarching architecture and structures we need to obviously put in place. And the biggest thing here, we also need to make sure that, for example, the enterprise levels of data and assets are also quite secure as well. All right. So one of the big things we're seeing, sort of reasons for a lot of IT organizations wanting to adopt this, right, is effectively, there is a sort of shift and a change in mindset around the sort of technologies we're about to discuss, and I'll come on to those. But here are the sort of key reasons why we're seeing businesses adopt this, enterprise organizations, all the way down to sort of like SMEs and so forth as well, is to kind of go for that simpler scenario-driven policies and settings sort of placement into the workforce. What that effectively translates to is that there is a subset of end users or sort of devices that you need to cover, whether they be laptops, desktops, or mobile phones, for example, that require just the basics, okay, the sort of low-hanging fruit within the organization. All right. The other thing we also need to cater for is making sure that devices are secure from anywhere and everywhere. A lot of the time in traditional setups, we would have to have quite complex certificate services. You'd have to make sure that the device left your organization secured, so there was a lot of time spent actually getting the device ready in-house. All right. Also need to make sure that typically then the data is also secure at all times, right, with then minimal overhead where possible. And that was always the challenge. IT had to spend a lot of time setting things up and getting things ready. So moving towards this more of a modern management approach, leveraging the technologies we'll come on to, the idea there is to have light touch. You kind of give a lot of the responsibility, not the responsibility, so to speak, but a lot of the power back to the end user in terms of being able to be self-sufficient, right, in terms of their approach. And then the other thing we're seeing as well is BYOD, so bring your own device or choose your own device, is also something we need to see and be able to deliver support for. So people like to work in different ways and means, and then all we really care about is, from an IT perspective, is whether the asset in itself supports its purpose. So can it see emails? Can it access SharePoint? Can it access internal services? How do we provide those from pretty much any device our end users want to use? There is options available within the EM+S side of things, but the adoption of BYOD is something we're seeing more and more. So when it comes to the modern management side of things, okay, what technologies do we need to start thinking about to start enabling this, right? So we're seeing a lot of leans towards things like Azure Active Directory from a Microsoft standpoint. Typically, that's where kind of things start within the EM+S stack as well. Windows Store for Business, I'm seeing this kind of adopted more and more, whereas it was something from an uptake perspective I found quite slow initially, actually. But we're seeing a sort of larger uptake in things like Windows Store for Business, whereby you can publish your line of business applications or give access to them from pretty much anywhere. And coupled with that as well, things like Windows Analytics is also something that is critical in the sort of modern world in terms of not necessarily being able to assess your readiness for something like Windows 10. So Microsoft made a bunch of tools available, referred to as the Windows 10 Readiness Assessment Upgrade tools, and they would give you a good early indication as to your readiness for something like Windows 10. So it gives you a high-level breakdown of applications and also then hardware, specifically things like drivers and so forth, around how ready your environment is overall to adopt things like Windows 10. As a strategic piece, we also recommend you keep that ongoing so you can then start looking at things like device health statuses. And a device health status isn't just, is it on, is it working? We could then start sort of building in checks, prerequisites, and so forth from a compliancy perspective with telemetry from Windows to sort of check how our end users are using their devices, kind of supporting their devices and managing their devices themselves. And then we can start making decisions as IT professionals based on data, as opposed to, being quite sort of knee-jerk and reactive at times. The two big following components there, so mobile device management, MDM, obviously a common term for it as well, that now stems to the Windows 10 world a lot of the time. So a mobile device in a lot of sort of IT professionals' head is something I can lift off my desk and take outside with me, whether that be a laptop, an iPad, or a phone. So we need to make sure that any corporately owned devices, we can keep secure with minimal overhead where possible, and also then support the application side of that as well. So MAM, or mobile application management, is effectively your first step into things like the BYOD world, where we can do some very clever things around making sure the data and everything is also safe and secure. SCCM still plays a big part in for example, the modern management side of things. I know, typically you might associate that initially with technologies like Intune and so forth. But Configuration Manager does a very good job working in harmony with cloud solutions, typically referred to as co-management. So your initial build cycles and so forth could be sort of run and be maintained from an on-premise or cloud-based Configuration Manager environment. And then as IT professionals, we can then manage certain additional elements like patching, security, and apps from the cloud space, all right? So we can then leverage things like that. And that kind of brings us on to the next slide, that could be true for mobiles and or desktop devices as well. There's also then a slew of other technologies that could make that up as well. So Office 365 and M365, your cloud-based technologies, for example, like your SharePoint Online, your Exchange Online, etc. So being able to give a wide range of application availability to end users is something that's becoming more and more critical. So from a modern management perspective, we're seeing a lot of these technologies leverage. So you might already have some of these. It's a case of then just adopting these further on down the line around your Windows 10 space, as well as your sort of user productivity space, to give you that modern management approach to your IT department as well, right? So the processes for this have slightly changed, obviously, from the initial one, all right? So, it's sort of simpler per user licensing we see these days a lot of the time with the way things are going, right? Managing your licensing with a subscription. And obviously, Fab will obviously come on to this a little bit later, has been simplified a lot of the time. So that's kind of your initial approach. The deployment side of things, right? We can do things like cloud-based provisioning now, not just, for example, like through DEP programs for mobile devices, but also, for example, leveraging technologies like, Intune and Autopilot and so forth from that initial staging perspective to get the device up and running. And you can do a lot of good stuff with just the OEM licensing, for example, as well, right? Identity is obviously a big thing in terms of making sure, credentials are safe and all sorts of things like that, and being able to kind of give people access to sort of services through the internet. Azure Active Directory does a very good job at that as well, right? Coupled into that, then we then have that analytics and that management piece I was talking about. So we can sort of see what our devices are doing, how they're doing it, checking the usage, making sure that they're managed through things like Intune and so forth as well. On the security side of things, some early things to think about at the moment is, okay, well, that's fine. I can give people apps. I can, do things like Autopilot. I can get them installed. But what else do I need to think about? So WD-ATP is Windows Defender ATP. We're seeing massive realms of adoption around that. Depending on your licensing, a lot of this is obviously included, of course, from a security management perspective, not just in terms of is the antivirus side of things, up and running and safe. There's also then these post-breach technologies, which I'll come on to as well, that can help with that security landscape. And obviously all of this is sort of cloud driven as well, right? App management, again, a very big thing, so being able to kind of provide applications to end users either through mandatory installation. So as part of an initial onboarding experience, you can have something run through autopilot or through its provisioning to sort of, install your sort of core applications like Office would obviously be a good one, Adobe Reader and so forth, any line of business applications automatically. We can also then give them access to sort of additional applications that the organization has provided, right? And all of this, again, is obviously driven through the cloud. When it comes to the patching side of things, keeping things up to date, these days in the Windows 10 world, guys, the updates have been split into quality and feature updates, right? So your quality update is effectively an accumulation of critical updates and sort of minor updates that Microsoft have accumulated into then a quality update, which then gets pushed to Windows 10 devices. It just means that from a patching perspective, they've reduced the amount of granularity required to deploy updates, but from an IT perspective, just a heads up, those update packages are slightly bigger than you may be used to previously. And then on the flip side of that, you then have your feature updates, and those feature updates is hopping from one version of Windows 10 to another. So going from 1803 to 1809 and from 1809 to 1903, etc., etc. And those things can be managed from the cloud side of things. Absolutely, they can. Windows Updates for Business does a very good job at that. And you can also then, as I said, in that co-management side of things, also have Configuration Manager still apply that granular level of patching, not just for Windows. We can do the same thing for the feature updates. So controlled version upgrades of Windows 10 is a big thing. And we can also then feed straight into that things like updates for applications in terms of Office 365 apps and line of business applications as well. On the security side of things, this in itself, I won't kind of sort of labor the point too much here, but it's just kind of showing what I wanted to show was effectively the sort of the sort of levels of security where we started and how things have been brought on and built on from Windows 10. And effectively all of the purple bits you're seeing at the top there is obviously kind of what's been brought into play from the Windows 10 world. A lot of these things we can enable, enforce, and check from the cloud as well, right? So that modern management experience can now be a case of, you can have that harmonious experience where a device is delivered to an end user, he or she logs in for the first time, leveraging, just email address and password, and a lot of the security is enforced there off the bat, right? So things like device guard, being able to stop malicious code from running on the device is a big thing as well. Credential guard, keeping your credentials safe, so partial hash attacks and so forth, are sort of prevented and taken care of. And then if the device encryption is a big thing as well, so we can actually leverage and enable that from the cloud as well. And then obviously following in from that, you have your standard sort of like built into Windows 10 provisionings as well, right? So you've got your BitLockers in there, you've got your Windows Identity Protection in there as well. And then across the side of that post-breach detection part I was talking about at the very end, all right, is the sort of main purpose for that, and why I wanted to just kind of focus on that for just a second is obviously a lot of the stuff we're doing from device protection, threat resistance, identity protection, information protection does a very good job for everything on the device. Once a breach happens or a security risk is in play and a threat has been detected on the device, what is the post-breach technology that's going to help and stop a lot of that, right? So for example, if credentials are stolen and we're trying to log into services, things like conditional access can do a very good job of blocking that, all right? So you would need things like a phone or whatever the case may be to kind of get a text message through and so forth. So even stealing someone's full email address and password these days is no longer kind of good enough from a hacker's perspective. You would need something else, and conditional access can mitigate a lot of those threats. And then from a Windows Advanced Threat Protection perspective, we can also then kind of have remediation actions that happens immediately with or without the user's interaction a lot of the time to kick off certain things to block access, remove that device from the domain, so to speak, isolate it so that, the threat in itself is contained, as well as then keep tabs and checks on things obviously as things go through the mill as well. So the security landscape, just from a Windows 10 perspective, has changed a lot. One of the biggest things as well from adopting sort of the modern management side of things, but also kind of adopting Windows 10 is, and I think this slide does a very good job at sort of displaying the mindset change that has to happen within IT. So you'll notice there are these two big spikes in the middle there. That refers to effectively the amount of disruption and effort that IT has to go through. So we would spend a lot of time going from whatever existed before XP to Windows XP. From XP, then there was a massive level of change, right? And then adoption and effort put in place to then kind of get you from XP to Windows 7. But between that XP and that Windows 7 program, there was a 4 to 5 year gap. From Windows 7 to Windows 10. There may have been just as big a gap as well. With Windows 10, that mindset has to change because, as we kind of alluded to earlier, Windows as a service is an ongoing management thing. So there is a low level of disruption, but that sort of low level of disruption, so to speak, from an upgrade perspective, is an ongoing one. But it just means that IT departments don't have to have these huge spikes in terms of effort and ongoing maintenance that they're sort of looking for as well. And you can sort of see Microsoft's been a bit ambitious in that sort of upward spike in, for example, its improvements, obviously open to interpretation. But from an IT perspective, when we're adopting these newer technologies and running with them, okay, it's a process, no longer a sort of massive spike in terms of project that we have to do. There is, of course, a sort of initial spike in terms of adopting Windows 10, but ultimately that ongoing piece is definitely something to consider as an IT department around, okay, how are we going to manage and maintain these levels of disruption to the end users as well, right? Following on from that, how all of these technologies fit together, right? Especially from a PowerON perspective, this is one of the solutions we've built for some of our clients, or it's something we go with quite a lot. Is to kind of, I just wanted to give you guys an overview of what that looks like. So we have a couple of solutions in place. We have a System Center Online that we've built effectively. Following in from that, you'll see EM+S in there as well with Windows 10. All right, we can then start doing some fairly modern deployment aspects of that already. So we can pre-provision devices, we can make sure that things are kind of driven from cloud identity perspectives, right? So devices can be configured to log in with corporate credentials, all right, giving access to exactly what we need and when we need from an IT perspective, all right? The procurement side of things can be quite straightforward. Depending on where we buy from, we can have those devices shipped to site ready to go. All of that can be managed through sort of cloud technologies again, right? And then the IT policies is even more critical than that, is to make sure that the policies and the settings and all of the security safeguards that IT have put in place, right, based on a strategy, are enforced. How do we check that? How do we make sure that's maintained? If something deviates from that, what do we do? There is lots of security and elements built into that, as well as lots of automation we've built in as PowerON to make sure that ongoing support and that ongoing transition management from one version of Windows 10 is catered for as well, right? So from a holistic perspective, you could look at managing your Windows 10 estate, your mobile phone estate in modern management aspects, all cloud driven, reducing the sort of on-premise requirements where possible, and giving that really cool flexibility to IT to effectively almost treat a laptop as if it was a phone. So for example, you can get rid of things like rebuilds in this scenario. You could just run the fresh start experience straight from Intune. It's as easy as just clicking fresh start. Then that will effectively rebuild that device, get it back to the out-of-box experience ready for the next user. Depending on CPUs and RAM, that could take anywhere from 15 minutes to half an hour, and then that device is then ready for the next person to use. The end user themselves can kick this off as well, should you wish. I know that sometimes sounds a bit scary, but actually enabling them to kind of self-remediate at times when something like that is required means that he or she can just log straight back in, get all the access they need, provided they've got an internet connection, right? One of the big things as well with adopting things like this, especially around identity and the sort of membership of that, right, is a sort of decision tree that I've worked on with a couple of clients, and they sort of found this quite useful. So I just wanted to kind of, sort of show you the guys the sort of train of thought in adopting some of these technologies, right? So is the device primarily on the go? No, it isn't. It's a desktop device. That's fine. I'll throw it onto the domain join and I'll manage it in the way I've always been managing devices, right? So that's the sort of typical scenario that we're used to, right? Is the device always on the go? Yes. Is the device domain joint? That's sort of problem. It will then just follow that same sort of trajectory. If the device isn't domain joined, right, is it a sort of corporate device? Is it a BYOD device? That's fine. How do I treat that? So corporate devices, that's fine. Modern management, Azure Active Directory with MDM provisioning as well, right? In a BYOD scenario, I could do things like, kind of just do MAM, so mobile application development. So what you can basically do with mobile application management, so you can, with your iPhone, for example, or your tablet, you can download the Outlook app, you can sign in with your corporate credentials, and I've wrapped all of the security I need into that app, and all of that is also driven from the cloud. So as part of that decision-making tree, you can also sort of see where some devices may fit, where others won't fit, and then it's very, very common these days as well, guys, to have a split approach in terms of managing that as well, right? The same can also be true for our settings and things like configuration, right? Is the device domain joint? Yes, it is. Fine, we'll carry on managing it in the sort of traditional way. If it's not domain joint, does it need, for example, feature level controls, right? So do I need to be very granular with this device? Do I need to be very careful, for sort of business applications or criticality applications? How do I manage that? Yes, that's fine. Well, then make sure that's in place. If it's not, that's fine. If it's just an end user device, he or she just needs Office and standard applications, I can just kind of run through the mill in terms of managing that device. That's not a problem. I can then pass that device over to the more sort of longer term management of that can then be managed from the cloud in terms of the modern management setup as well, right? So when it comes to obviously how PowerON platforms can help, right? We work very heavily with Bytes, so the licensing conversation is definitely one to have with Bytes on the support side of things. We've done a lot of work with organizations around solution alignment. Okay, what does that mean? What does that feel like in terms of an adoption approach for Windows 10, cloud technologies, as well as then even on-premise technologies a lot of the time in migrating to something like Windows 10, right? So a lot of the work we do, we can review the current estate and the usage of that estate to look for sort of inefficiencies, where things can be modernized, and make recommendations to boot around that as well. We can help define and cater for a sort of end user compute strategy to make sure the business goals are definitely being met by what the business needs, and IT can support and enable the organization to obviously carry those out. We can also then help around sort of application management. And one of the biggest things these days is your success criteria is very much determined on your capability of supplying applications to end users that work and work all of the time and are maintained. So you can help define those processes as well. And also then from a security side of things, you have so many options in terms of where security can come from, where should it come from, where does it need to come from, when should it apply, when should it not apply, and so on as well. In order to support that, a lot of the time, we like to get hands-on. So proof of concept setups is something we can stand up very rapidly to give IT departments a sort of real tangible look and feel as to what this really means with their environment, all right? Coupled in with that, we can also help support things like business case creation. So as part of the solution alignment framework that we've got, there's initial planning stages in there as well that we can sort of dive into things like cost analysis as well to help supply IT departments with the adoption sort of costs for these, the ongoing management costs of these for year 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 as well. And again, coming back to that security access side of things, making sure that IT has got a very good sort of baseline from a strategic point of view with the direction they need to travel. And then also making sure that everything and anything that's been put in place has been maintained. And how do we check? What reports can we pass back to the business? How can we do that as well? We can also then help define that deployment approach in terms of the low-hanging fruit, which to do first, which to do second, which to do last, where the gaps are. We can also then help put that into timelines and also help support IT staff with things like training and knowledge transfer and sort of ongoing support as well. And all of that coupled naturally is obviously designed to get from where we are now into more of a modern management look and feel a lot of the time. From a follow-up perspective, this is my last slide, guys. We are here to help. Anyone sort of attending the sessions can ask for a tailored session. Happy to set something up, obviously following this. So if you wanted to, get in touch with your account manager at Bytes to help support that conversation. And that's pretty much everything from me. I'll go ahead now and hand you over to Fab on Bytes' side. Thanks, guys.
Hi, good morning. So my name is Fabienne and I'm going to go through the licensing for the enterprise mobility and security and for Microsoft 365. So earlier we've heard from Enric about all the management products available. What I'm going to do is just go through how you can license those products. So first we'll look at enterprise mobility and security, and then I'll go on to how we can license Microsoft 365 and also the Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protection later on as well. So to start with enterprise mobility and security, there are two flavors. EM+S E3, which you can see on the left here, which includes the Intune we've talked about, the Azure Active Directory Premium, and a lot of other security and management products. And then you also have the E5 suite, which has all of the higher functionality of, again, management and identity. What that suite also gives us is what Microsoft calls dual access rights. And what that means is that not only when you purchase EMS you get access to the cloud services, but you also get access to the on-premises equivalent CALs. That means that you will also have Windows Server CAL to access on-premises AD. You'll have SCCM as part of the suite as well, so there's no separate purchase for that, and also the endpoint protection CALs. And then if you're looking at the rest of the Microsoft products and you're looking to actually license Windows 10, you're looking maybe also to license Office 365, install Office 365 Pro Plus, then you might want to look at the Microsoft 365 suite. The Microsoft 365 suite is a suite of products that includes EMS we've just talked about, Windows 10 and also Office 365. And there are three flavors of that suite, Microsoft 365 F1, E3 and E5. So the F1 suite is really aimed at deskless workers, so users who don't necessarily use a computer on a daily basis. They might just have a smartphone or a tablet or share a device, for example, but they still need access to email, they still need access to SharePoint, and of course they still need whatever devices they have and their identity to be managed and secure. So it does include the full EM+S E3 features, and Office 365 F1 with access to email and SharePoint, and also limited functionality of Windows 10. The next suite up is Microsoft 365 E3, and that includes Office 365 E3 with the Office installation, and also includes the full Windows 10 Enterprise and Enterprise Mobility and Security E3. And then we also have the Microsoft E5 suite. So that includes all of the higher functionality. So you have security functionality, some of which we've talked about earlier, compliance functionality, meeting and calling functionality, and then also analytics functionality with things like Power BI. Now, you might not need all of those features, so you can purchase all of the additional functionality as a standalone add-on to Microsoft 365 E3, and that's an overview of all the additional products that exist on top of 365 E3. But if you need more than 2 or 3 products, depending on what they may be, it tends to be cheaper to buy a suite of those products. And Microsoft has actually recently updated their licensing to add 2 new suites. The Identity and Threat Protection Suite, which includes all of the security components of Microsoft 365 E5, and also the Information Protection and Compliance Suite, which includes all of the compliance features of Microsoft 365 E5. And what that means is if you're licensed for Microsoft 365 E3 and you're looking to go up to M365 E5, you have more choices to do so. You can either use one of the suites that we've just talked about. So, for example, if you're just looking at security features, you could just buy the Identity Threat Protection Suite to have just the security features without having to purchase, for example, the voice functionality, which you might not need. And also, if you have M365 E3 and you're looking to just use Windows Advanced Threat Protection, Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protection, which we talked about earlier, but you don't actually need any of the other features, you could just buy the Windows 10 E5 Step Up. That would give you the Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protection, which is part of the Windows E5. And of course, you can also upgrade to the whole E5 suite as well. And that's all from me. I'll pass you back to Cassie for questions.
Thank you, Fabienne, and thank you, Heinrich, for your detailed presentation. Yes, so if anyone does have any questions, please pop them in the questions box on the right-hand side of the screen. We can answer them now. If there is anything that you think of later on, we can come back to you offline. You can email tellmemore@bytes.co.uk, or you can indeed reach out to your Bytes account manager. We'll be sending around a copy of the recording to all those who have registered for today, and we'll also make the slides available to those who need them. I don't think we have any questions at the moment. Everyone's feeling a bit shy. So I'd just like to say thank you to both of our presenters today. And again, if you do have anything, please do get in touch. And if you just fill out the critique form at the end, it will just pop up as the window closes. There's just a couple of questions there. It just really helps us with our feedback to tailor our webinars moving forward. So thank you to the presenters today, and thank you everyone for joining us, and I hope you all have a great day.